I'm Carys, and this is Over the Top, Under the Radar. The show takes a weekly look at the stories in the news that are overreported and the ones going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. This week's show is in conversation with the incredible Deborah Frances-White. Deborah is a stand-up comedian, podcaster, screenwriter, and the author of 6 Conversations We're Scared to Have. Her voice will be familiar if you listen to the Guilty Feminist podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Deborah.
It's a delight to be here, Carys.
You've got a new book out, 6 Conversations We're Scared to Have. I have to ask, what on earth made you want to write it? Because it's a wonderful book. I loved it. I'm going to talk a bit more about it. But I was just like, what made you want to do this?
I decided that I couldn't continue doing the kind of work I was doing with the Guilty Feminist unless I came clean and said, I don't think we as progressive people, my communities, are getting this right, as evidenced by the fact that in the wider world, we are currently not winning. And we're seeing the rise of the far right in America. We're seeing it spread across the world, certainly across Europe. There are a few countries that have pushed back for now. But overall, we need to be better at persuading. We need to be better at strategy. I think our radicals need to get more pragmatic. Our pragmatists need to get more radical. And I feel like desperately we need solidarity. We need coalition. And we're always taking each other down. And we don't see that on the far right. You don't see trad wives taking apart Andrew Tate, although on the face of it, they're enemies. They would say Andrew Tate doesn't speak respectfully about women. I want to be nurtured. I want to be loved. I want to be a mother. I want my marriage to be sacred. But you don't see them making nasty posts about Andrew Tate because essentially they're all on the same side, which is back to really old-fashioned gender roles, far-right candidates winning elections. And increasingly, there's a move in America to take the vote away from women. You can't even believe that you're saying that now. Like, it's sort of like, what? I never in my lifetime thought that would ever become an issue. But there's a serious, definitely niche movement of people, but some of them are very influential, including Pete Hegseth, who's their Secretary of Defense.
I can't handle him. He's one of the take the vote away crew.
I'm sorry, but he just is. And he shared and endorsed with extra added Jesus on top a montage of videos from far-right Christian nationalists who think there should be one vote per household. And they're saying, well, if there's only a woman as the head of the household, i.e. it's a mother and some children, she should have the vote.
Oh, great.
But if it's a heterosexual marriage and they don't believe in any other kind, a man should consult his wife, and then Jesus says he's the head of the household.
Oh, Jesus said.
That's right.
Okay.
The Bible says that the man's the head of the household, so then he should have the vote for the family.
Got it.
And they're framing it as not take the vote away from women, but bring back the family. We've sunk into this pit of individualism. We need households, families to have one voice.
Okay,
split
so
up
it's
the family.
about togetherness, and really,
it's really about togetherness.
Yeah,
and in every case where there is a man in the house, be that a father of grown-up children, be that a husband of a wife.
Okay, what about like a teenage son? Does that count? Or
he will, when he turns 18.
Great, good to know.
Even though his mother's 45, he will become the head of the household because he's the man of the house. You can see that's the way that it's going. You're looking at that and you're going, I mean, when I started writing the book, obviously that wasn't happening, but I could see it coming. And I wrote a lot about some of these things in my book that I could see coming. And I thought, people are going to be thinking I'm alarmist, or I found things out and I went, this sounds like a conspiracy theory. But since the book went to bed, it's all come out, all the Project 2025 stuff, since it's come out. When it came out, it just seemed like a perfectly reasonable commentary on what's happening right now. But I was a bit ahead of the game because I had to do research and I was like, really? This is happening? And it's quite shocking.
Yeah, it's aged incredibly well, the book, I would say. I don't know when you put it to bed, but it feels very,
It feels very relevant to now. And I really wish everything I'd thought was going to come didn't. And the book was much less relevant in a much better world. I'm so sorry I was right about some of these things. But here they are. We are in a time where if progressive people will not make positive coalitions and jump on board with each other and get better at speaking to people who are apoliticized and people who are in a different political camp, we are going to lose. So the idea that we can say, well, I'm not educating you, or Google it. I mean, what people, Emma Dabiri says this in her book, What White People Can Do Next. People Google it and the algorithm sends them right. Don't tell people to Google it.
The book is called 6 Conversations We're Scared to Have. And it is, I mean, it's lots of things. Do a great deep dive into everything from why women wear high heels to why loads of left-wing people were eugenicists. And it's like, there's a real curiosity that comes throughout the book, but there is a really clear rallying cry, which is sort of rooted in, we as progressives on the left need to get better disagreeing with people, persuading people, and feeling uncomfortable. I think that was the thing that I took from reading the book, but also I think you do a lot of sharing your own thought processes and times you felt uncomfortable or times you've been called out. And was there a specific thing that made you want to write the book, or it was just the general onslaught of being, a high profile feminist who gets...
I have to do a lot of podcasts every year, and I started to feel uneasy and uncomfortable that my community was going in the wrong direction, that we had so many of the right goals, but also it's okay for us to disagree a bit about what the goals are, or disagree about how those goals are best realized. And I felt every time I went in a certain direction, a whole heap of people would pile on and say, not necessarily to me, sometimes to me, but I'd see them doing it to each other, to other people, saying, you've done that wrongly, you've used the wrong word. And one of the things that I remember talking to a friend who was doing a documentary about a homeless community in America, and there was a chap who was homeless, who was the kind of leader of this community, and he said he was a Trump supporter. And my friend who was making the documentary said, why? And he said, well, I went to the local Republican Party and said, I've got this community, this is what we need, blah, blah, blah. And they said, how can our church raise money for you? And I went to the local Democrat chapter and said, look, I'm the leader of this homeless community and I need help. And the person I talked to said, you shouldn't say homeless, you should say unhoused. And they just told me off because I was using the wrong language. It was all about language and ideology. And there was no easy, open connection. We have these purity politics where we say, you've got to reach all of these standards and agree with me on 100% of things, or at least pretend you do, because no one agrees with you about 100% of things. We're all different human beings. We've all got different life experiences. We've all got a different education. We've all got different makeup. So there's a lot of people in our communities who are pretending to believe things. And someone comes along, and I call it weed killing, internet weed killing, where people come along and go, you've used the wrong term. You need to apologize. You've said the wrong thing. You need to apologize. And they bully that person into apologizing. But that doesn't change their mind. And in a way, nor should it. I always think if you could change someone's mind entirely in one conversation, that's bad news. Because that person's then going to go down to the pub and someone else is going to say, well, think of it like this. And their mind's going to be totally changed again. Ideally, if someone's going to change their mind and shift their worldview, it should be over a series of conversations, thought processes, reading books, thinking about things, getting to know people better, thinking things through. That's when you see an actual change in somebody. And for the longest time, I felt like we are all in a series of cults where if I am to belong to this, I call them Stamms because it's a German word that means, it can mean lots of different things, but it,
sort of community or chosen family, you kind of explain it as in the book. Is that,
your Stammtisch is your central perk, your Joey and your Chandler, but your Stammbaum is your family tree. So a lot of the words that Stamm makes up when it's a compound word has that friendly feel of you want to be where everyone knows your name. It could be somebody, it's not necessarily your community, but you could see someone in the street with your football scarf or your, favorite band T-shirt, and you kind of give them a nod. It's the way people who drive a red Mini or something see each other and go, hey, member of the Mini Club. It doesn't mean that person is in your community, but it does mean there's a fellow feeling.
Yeah, I love the idea of Stamm. It was one of many concepts that you introduced in the book that I really liked. And I think the thing that struck me was that you were able to be quite clear-eyed about saying this weed killing, this policing of one another isn't effective. And I thought with a lot of your own personal story, you talked about where it came from and that need for belonging and connection. Mm. And I guess, it was almost like a way of validating the emotions, but still saying that the behavior and the practice wasn't quite right. Is that?
Yes. people do things for good reasons. That's what we have to remember. People are guarding their patch. When it comes right down to it, primarily, one person cannot beat a lion in the fight. So we've all come from the savannah originally. Actually, look at us. How come we're the top of the food chain? We are doughy, soft. We don't have a shell. We don't have scales. We don't have venom. We don't have claws.
We need SPF.
We need SPF. Look at us. We're doughy and slow. Compared to most animals, we can't outrun a cougar. So why did we get to be top of the food chain? And the answer is community. Because 10 people can outsmart a lion. And to the detriment of the planet, to be fair, we are the top of the food chain. We run the show. So that means, in other words, our physical survival at a cellular level, we feel it really relies on community. As much as we don't like to admit it, because it makes us feel vulnerable, I need you and you need me to mentally survive. It is what it is to be human, is to have contact with other human beings, have conversations with other human beings, have collaborations with other human beings on a mental and physical level. So, of course, we need community. And as we have become less and less engaged or in connection with our actual community, I mean, people used to know very well the people that made their bread and the people that made their clothes and or grew the cotton or, whatever it was, that people lived in villages. So you knew the vicar, you knew the seamstress, you knew all those people. Now we just don't know those people anymore. Do you know who made your last loaf of bread?
No. Well,
do you know?
I mean, like I buy hipster bread, so presumably someone floating around in the hipster bakery.
That's what's really interesting about that. What has become gentrified and luxury is to now have your bread made locally, and you could go in and you at least might know the name of the person giving it to you, or they'd give you a friendly hello, we saw you last week. That's become a luxury. That's become a high-end experience. Most people who don't have a lot of money would have no way of knowing who made that bread, who sliced it, who bagged it. Even the delivery person who might bring your groceries if you use a delivery service, the guy will probably just go, hi, blah, 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 here it is. There's no human connection.
So I think that's what's quite powerful about the book. There's a lot of empathy and compassion for everyone involved, so that you're very clear about why it is we do this kind of self-policing and weed killing and calling in, and that it's about wanting to feel part of something. But there's almost like a tragedy that to make ourselves feel more part of the sham or the community or the group, we're alienating others and sort of like harming our own, I guess. Is that something that you feel is happening on the left right now?
I think so. The problem we have is now our shtam is not our local community. It's people on the internet who have the same interests as us or the same values as us. And when it's political values, it's really, really easy to go, you're in or you're out. I can't see your face. I don't know who you are. The only way you can prove to me you're part of this shtam and you add value, the way someone baking the bread used to bring value, is if you live up to these standards and you say every single thing I want you to say. Because there's no other value in this relationship. All there is we share values. And you've got to endorse me and I've got to endorse you. So if somebody from the other side comes around and criticizes you, I pile on and go, no, I stand up for Carys and you stand up for me. But what if I then say, hey, I've got this opinion about something I'm not sure about X, Y, and Z. And you go, no, you can't say that, because then I'm not going to be able to come to your aid anymore, because you've proven yourself to be not a completely reliable member of our shtam who agrees with everything we say. And we all know that at times we've thought, I'm just going to keep that thought to myself, or tell a super close friend who I really trust, but I wouldn't bring it up in the pub in front of a bunch of people in my industry. I don't know who they are. I don't necessarily trust them. I'd have to really trust someone to say what I feel about something if it's a controversial issue. That reminds me of being in a cult, as I was in a religious cult when I was younger. There were things you knew exactly what you could and couldn't say. And I tell a story in the book about an older woman in my congregation called Sister Pamela.
I love Sister Pamela.
And women were not allowed to speak on the platform, we called it, like the pulpit. We weren't allowed to preach. But there was a Q&A, basically men were brothers and women were sisters. A brother would read a paragraph of the Watchtower magazine, then another brother, who was an elder, which is a position of responsibility, would ask the question at the bottom of the page, and then we had to answer what we'd learned by putting it into our own words to show that we'd understood it. There was to be no deviation. I mean, someone might ramble a bit, but there was to be no deviation from the official dogma as expressed by the Watchtower Society. And Sister Pamela, she was like in her 60s. I was super young. I was like 20 or something. She put up her hand and she said, just to look at the scripture through another framework. And there was an audible gasp. People were like, what? There's no other framework. There's only the Watchtower's framework. What are you talking about? And she then gave a really harmless but parallel second interpretation of this scripture. And it was about the book of Revelation, which is completely inscrutable prophecies about, there's the whore of Babylon, there's the wild beast. Who would know what it is meant to mean? And of course, the Watchtower Society has very specific interpretations that do change every 2 to 5 years, but which, it's a bit like 1984. We were always at war with East Asia. That kind of, now we've changed our minds, that's what we think. And she just said, there's a different way of looking at this. And I think it means this. And a lot of religions would welcome that kind of theological debate. And, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Maybe it could mean that. Maybe it could mean this. No, it means what the Watchtower says it means. And everybody flipped out. And it's all we talked about today. So we were like, I cannot believe it. And she said this. And it was such a big deal amongst me and my young 20-year-old friends. We were aghast. And then we knew that would cause so much trouble. And the elders took her aside and said, you can't do it again.
And she gets ostracized, right? She gets sort of shunned, or
she was marked. And marking means they'll give a talk saying, you can't deviate from what the Watchtower says, but they don't name the person, but they say, if you know a person who has done this, then you don't socialize with them. But they don't actually announce your name at that point. If you do it again, you can be privately reproved, you can be publicly reproved. Privately reproved, no one knows about it, but there's a local needs talk. And people know these congregations were like 100, 150 people. People knew who it was. But publicly reproved means they would get up and they would say, Sister Carys is being publicly reproved. In other words, now we know we definitely don't socialize with, your name has been mentioned. And then the next stage after that is disfellowshipping, which is Carys Foco is no longer a member of the congregation of Camden, Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever it is. After that, if we saw you in the street, we had to pretend we couldn't see you. You were dead to us, like absolutely. And if you wanted to come back, you had to come and sit up the back of the Kingdom Hall. No one would speak to you. Everyone would act like you were a ghost. You went there for a year or, as long as, longer in many cases, as long as until the elders were satisfied that you met the criteria and you were living in a godly way and you weren't going to do whatever rebellious thing you'd done, or you had to prove to them that you were faithful. Felt like a really long, emotionally traumatic episode of The Traitors that would play.
Yeah, I was going to say it's giving Traitors, but without the costumes.
Exactly. If only we had the costumes, because that would have made it fun.
Yeah.
And so all my friends used to get disfellowshipped because they were always the fun people, fun being a relative term. And then I would see them. I remember you'd go to the cinema and they'd be 2 seats down and you couldn't say hello and you had to pretend they weren't there and they would pretend they hadn't seen you. And it was really horrible. I found it very traumatic to see my friends in the wild. So from this experience, anyway, Pamela wasn't allowed to speak anymore into the microphone, but she still put her hand up for every single question, defiantly.
That whole passage, I was just like, I just love Pamela. She's gold.
Nevertheless, she persisted, Sister Pamela. And she one time, an elder just saw her hand and said, Sister Pamela. I don't know if he was, hadn't been around much. I can't remember why. He just forgot, just panicked. And the young, because there was always young brothers on the microphones that didn't really have any other responsibility, panicked and just gave her the mic. She did it again. She questioned the Watchtower again. And we knew that was curtains then. Then she got announced as disfellowshipped and we never saw her again. If you saw her on the street, you had to look away. I don't remember ever seeing her on the street. The thing we asked ourselves continually was, how did she have the courage to do that? What drove her? And I think we discussed as young people, because we were very devout. I was very brainwashed by it. I was a teenager and adolescence is an ideal time to join a mind controlling cult because your brain is looking for new Stamm. It's, and it's desperately, wanting new community. I remember us discussing it, and I remember young people for the first time admitting we're really close friends, we're a really tight bunch, we were all pioneering, which meant we were full-time door knocking and part-time working just to survive. So we were really poor. We only had each other. We weren't allowed to do anything entertaining. We were allowed to go to a movie if it was like PG, but we couldn't go clubbing or to a pub or...
You can't celebrate your birthday, can you?
No, we had no birthdays, no Christmas, and no money to do anything anyway. You're allowed to have a drink, but you weren't allowed to go drinking or anything like that. So we couldn't really do anything fun. So our fun was to hang out together and make a pasta or something like that and talk. And often we're all very devout. So we talked about the scriptures, we talked about, our pioneering goals or whatever. And I remember that was the very first time where we sat and said, well, of course, sometimes I do have doubts, but I would never express them because the most important thing is to be obedient to Jehovah's organization. And I remember this very obsessively devout young man who was very key to our little community of young pioneers saying, I also thought, this was such a big confession. He said, I also thought that how do they know that X means Y? But I didn't express it even to myself. I just quickly moved on. And the reason we were saying it was not we were in alliance with Sister Pamela. We were shocked by Sister Pamela's, but it was to admit, well, sometimes we might have Sister Pamela-like thoughts, but you don't say them. When I left that organization, it was very painful because I left behind everybody I knew. I didn't speak, and I'd go to improv class and in a week, and I wouldn't see anyone on the weekend. And sometimes I'd go and get a cup of coffee just to hear my own voice, just to say, hi, I'd like a latte. And I felt very lonely. I had to rebuild friends, chosen family. It was very traumatizing to come out of it. But then I felt so free. I went to university, lots of ideas, lots of people, could do anything I want, could create any work I wanted, stories, so free, feminist debates, the whole thing. And in the last 10 years, I have started to feel like I'm in a cult again. I've started to feel like, oh, well, we all have Sister Pamela thoughts. We wouldn't say them out loud.
I want to say a warm welcome to Jordan and Thomas, who joined the Patreon community this week. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. Been doing the show for just over a year now, and honestly, I'm really proud of what we've built together. Thanks to a few hundred people who make a small donation every month, we can bring you great guests like Deborah Frances-White and spend the time digging into stories that the mainstream media doesn't cover enough. Patreon packages start at £3 a month, and you get a bonus episode every week, the chance to ask questions to upcoming guests, and access to the Over-Under WhatsApp community. If you listen to the show every week and it matters to you, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/overthetop_under-the-radar. Was there anything you didn't get to include in the book that you wished to, or are there any examples you want to give to people now to give them a sense of when you've had that feeling again?
There's one thing I'd like to update in the paperback that, when you see something as you put it to bed. So there's an actress called Ellie Kemper who you might know from The Office, The American Office, you might know from Kimmy Schmidt. And in 2021, photos of her surfaced at a debutante's ball at the American South, run by the Veiled Prophet organization. And for a while, she was dubbed as a KKK princess because the Veiled Prophet organization, that it does look a lot like the KKK. It's got a horrible past, and both racist and sexist and also elitist. And she said, look, I'm really, really sorry. I had no idea at the time. I was 19. I didn't know what it stood for. That hadn't been evident in my time, which is plausible. It hadn't been, evident at that time. But she said, I should have just looked into it. I should have known. It's absolutely no excuse. I should have educated myself. But the thing that I would like to update is that the reason that this ball happened in the first place is that Black people and working class white people in this area had come together to go on strike because they were both being treated terribly. And they were like, right, we're coming in solidarity, we're coming in coalition, and we're going to fight this together. And they put on this display through the street. This is in 1878. And so in response to, I'll read a bit from the book here, in response to white and black railroad and factory workers teaming up to go on strike to protest wage cuts, child labour and long hours, the VPO itself was founded. The founders established this legend and pageantry which was paraded through the streets to inspire fear in the workers and reassert their white elitist power. So in other words, they put on a KKK-like demonstration to frighten the black people and to divide this coalition. And I feel instead of bringing Ellie Kemper out into the town square and going, you should be ashamed, and then not everyone feeling like we've done something now, we've made her apologize, what we could have done is gone to Ellie Kemper and said, hey, did you know the origins of this when you were 19? And she no doubt would have said no. And then, like, would you, with us in coalition and alliance, say, hey, I was a part of this, and this made me, looking back, this was horribly uncomfortable. I was a teenager. This was an old man. It was awful. And now I realize that the iconography has obviously been changed. They don't look like KKK men today, but they still look really scary and horrible. And at the time, I didn't see that element. But now I realize also it has this horrible origin and this KKK element. And I would like to campaign as a former beauty queen to change this pageant to something that's an inclusive, brand new celebration built by black and white people together in coalition. And I want to be an advocate for that as a former beauty queen. Now, I think the power of that is then in coalition, loads of black and white people come together and go, we want something new that acknowledges this horrendous past and builds a real coalition. And instead, what they got was Ellie Kemper doing an apology and then the pageant changing a bit into, they don't call it Val Prophet anymore, but it's a very good old boy. It's got an eagle, American eagle. It's basically the same thing in slightly less KKK clothes. Why are we bringing her to account when we could be bringing her into coalition, allowing her to be a powerful force and voice? Because then we might have actually made real change, but it feels good to bring someone out into the town square and have a moment of throwing things and
catharsis. I think that's what I really took from it. I was like, oh yeah, it's an annoying message for a book because you're like, oh, things are a bit more complicated, and to make change we need to engage critically and be more reflective. But yeah, it was like there's this sort of sugar hit from this person is bad and they're terrible. And I think, it feels very much a product of the social media age, although you make it really clear in the book that, we didn't invent cancellation in the last 10 years. But yeah, I guess it feels like we're asking, and it's something that I think I'm guilty of and have also been on the receiving end of that short term, I got it right, you got it wrong. Or
of course, we're all in the ecosystem. We're somewhere in that ecosystem. So the thing that I would like to add that I saw clear as day after the book went to print is look at the origins of the VPO. Black and white people were uniting against the power. What they did is they came in and they divided. They went, we are going to terrorize black people and go, look, white people are better. And we're going to divide you. And we're going to frighten black people out of coalition into white people. And so the most powerful thing we could have done in 2021 is go, they did this. They broke up the class war to make some people feel superior and some people feel inferior, and to go, all white people are the same. Don't make a coalition with working class white people. They're so frightened of us unionizing. They're so frightened of us striking, because without the working people working, what are they going to do? If we had formed a coalition in 2021, we would have defeated their original goal. By taking Ellie out into the town square and go, apologize, you're a bad white lady. And then she just goes, I'm really sorry, that was shit of me. I didn't realize, but now I do. And I should have known at the time. I should have done more research. I'm really, really sorry. We've exacerbated exactly what their original goal was, which was to divide us.
And that feels so true at the moment when we see, as you said, a resurgent right, a right that is winning office in lots of countries, maybe here in a few years, and is so clearly dividing us. It feels very self-defeating that we're in this sort of zero-sum campaign where we're policing one another. One of the reasons I was glad to have you on the show is it feels like incredibly true in the case of gender at the moment. I find it incredibly hard and frustrating to see women's safety and the threat of violence against women to be like weaponized by right-wing groups and by like perpetrate, in the case of people like Elon, it's like the most, I guess, a symptom of how bad things have got, that our own side is we're fighting one another, and then the far right are positioning themselves as like the defenders of women's safety, and like, which was just epitomized by a friend cycled through Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom rally and obviously got street harassed. And I was just like, yeah, that's where we're at.
I can't stand it, because it's come out that so many of those men who were on those anti-immigration marches saying they were protecting women's rights, children's rights, so many of them had convictions for domestic violence, had convictions for child sex offending, had convictions for all sorts of things that were definitely not in the protecting women and children space. And just the average guy that says that, any time the Me Too movement says, hey, there's 6 to 12 people all saying that this male celebrity assaulted them, tried to assault them, threatened them, sexually harassed them, gold diggers, how do we know he's a good bloke, blah, 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 blah. But when it's an immigrant, they are so quick to believe.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah,
one woman can say, he looked at me funny, and they're like, that's what they're like.
That's why we got to get rid of them. I mean,
they never believe women, some of these guys. Not all men, hashtag not all men. But some of these guys never believe women unless it's an immigrant.
I spend a lot of time thinking about it, because it feels like, as ever, feminism is like, is at the heart of all of these things. On the one hand, we're seeing this backlash and trad wives, and then on the other hand, we're being told that migrants, refugees, trans people, we have to worry about them because of the women and the girls that we care about so much. And it's just like, it just feels, it is a bit crazy making. Like, how do you make sense of it?
I think the far right have become very strategic, very patient, and very, very, very good at reframing arguments, stealing our arguments and using them against us. They've become so strategic. And what I'm arguing is we have to become strategic. We have to become persuasive. We have to get together. We have to think long term. We can't expect all change to happen by Wednesday week just because we've shouted at somebody. It's not going to happen. We need to become strategic. We need to be much better at persuasion, figure out what convinces people, what win people over long term. I mean, something I say in the book, and I've said a few times when I've been promoting the book, is Coca-Cola do not advertise by saying, fuck you if you drink Pepsi.
One of my favourite lines of someone slid into your DM saying like, fuck you if you're a feminist, and was right. There was
it was fuck you if you're a feminist and you're not talking about this. You say you're a feminist, you're not talking about this. That was their opening line. And I immediately forwarded them all the posts where I had talked about the thing that they'd wanted me to be talking about. And I said, here are 4 episodes in the last 6 months that I've done on this. Here's this person I've talked to. Here's this person I've talked to. Here's this huge fundraiser I've done for this. And I said, I don't know what made you think that you as a stranger to me should open with fuck you if, but that doesn't feel persuasive to me. Had I not done that work, who knows? Maybe I've just had a diagnosis and I'm just trying to keep my head above water. Maybe I pre-recorded loads of episodes because I knew that I was going into, a scripted television show. And then, so maybe there's a million maybes, but the best way to persuade me to do what you want me to do is to say, hey, first of all, Google check that I haven't talked about it. But if I haven't, write to me and say, I think someone with your value set, I've listened to you for a while, I've looked at your work, I think you're great. I think someone with your value set would want to talk about this. Here's 3 people I think you could interview. Here's an article I think you'd love to read. Here's a video that I think might inspire you or engage you around this. That is a positive step forward now. Now I'm like, oh, what you're saying is somebody like me who you respect is likely to want to talk about this. Let me give you some help. Let me give you some things that might inspire and engage you. And we've got to start thinking in terms of inspiring and engaging. rather than scolding and shaming. Because when you shame somebody, they go into fight or flight. And people can't learn when they're in fight or flight. If there's a rhinoceros running at you, if you think, oh my God, I've got, I can feel someone walking behind me, that's not the great time to do your Duolingo. If you've ever been walking home from the at night thinking, is someone following me? Sure there's a guy behind me. Do you pop in your Duolingo and go, just want to go over those Italian words again because I really think I'm getting somewhere with my Italian.
Building my streak.
Yeah, exactly. I want to build up my Duolingo streak. No, that's not the time because you're like, I've got to be on alert. I'm in danger because my amygdala is activated. I won't remember a thing if I start thinking about, I've got to learn that off by heart or, do this. You learn best when you're in a relaxed state. So firstly, and an engaged state. So firstly, why should you learn about this? And I think a person like you would want to learn about something like this. I think if you saw it, your mind would really be changed. And certainly if my mind's been changed, which it almost always has been at some point, because I wasn't born knowing all of this stuff. In the summer of 2020, I saw a lot of white people really shaming and scolding publicly other white people and saying, educate yourself. You should already know this.
Yeah, it was a weird moment in that sense. It was a lot of white people doing the most.
And I was like, when did you learn about this? Because I know when I learned about it. And I learned about it before many white people because I had a podcast and people slid into my DMs and said, hey, you're not having enough black guests on, or you're not, you should be doing this and this. Black women had taught me 3 to 4 years before. That's how I knew about it. It was black women. So who am I to be saying to another white person, educate yourself? Why don't you already know? What? I didn't know about it 3 or 4 years ago. Why would I expect this person who is in a less political space than me?
That is often the challenging thing, especially when everyone is capable of being non-compassionate and belligerent. No one has a monopoly on being a dickhead, but I think that is the hardest thing in social justice spaces, when it's not someone from the community, but someone who's, an ally or has often quite recently learned something.
No.
Going around being like, wow, how dare you? And what's the point of that? And you're just a bit like, okay, but you don't. You're
not winning anyone over. If you are an ally, and I prefer to talk about coalition now because I read Emma Deberry's book and had her on the show. She's brilliant on coalition, saying, look, we need solidarity, coalition, and we need people coming together to say your struggle is my struggle. And there's any sense of underclass, marginalization, oppression. We are all aligned in those things, and we make the world better for all of us when we all go in solidarity. And that's what really scares them. They love breaking us up into all men are trash. Well, I can't say anything now as a white person, or I'm accused of being racist, or, they love that. By them, I mean the powers that be, because then we're not working together to come into coalition to rise up and say, no, this isn't good enough.
One way in which you sort of hold a mirror up to that is by looking at the right, the Christian right and the far right. The religious right in America and increasingly in Europe sort of has pragmatically looked at the world and been like, this is how we want it to change and this is how we get there. And that they are not engaging in purity politics. They're being very sort of tactical and smart and canny about where there's a way to sort of wedge in with their opinions. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that. And
totally. I think what they've done is they discovered early on that right-wing YouTubers and podcasters saying, hey, young men, you haven't had a fair shot. Women aren't dating you. The women you want, that you've been told by porn or by popular culture to aspire to, don't want you. Therefore, you're involuntarily celibate because you deserve the most stereotypically billboard attractive woman in the world. And if you don't get that woman, that's because she's a feminist and she's decided you're not good enough. Be angry about that. And they realized that quite quickly they could start with a lot of young men come to this, and this is all in the book, but it's really, really interesting. I think it's a lot of young men come to YouTube looking for self-help, looking for mental health. They don't necessarily have the money or the feel the bravery to go to a therapist, but they'll look at a YouTube video that I'm feeling really down, and really quickly, or I want to build up my muscles, and really quickly the algorithm pushes them really, really far right. And they were having a lot of success with young men, but what do they do with young women? And I think they just looked around and strategically went, how are young women being influenced? And the answer is literally by women who call themselves influencers. The name is on the tin. And so what they realized is young white women are influenced by beautiful white women in bikinis, in crop tops, in pretty dresses, saying, hey, drink this tea, do these Pilates, make this recipe for low-fat enchiladas, make this tea candle, whatever it is. And they went, we could get some of those. And that's what trad wives are. Trad wives are influencers for the far right that say, hey, feminism's told you that you don't want to stay home. Feminism's told you to get a degree and go to college and fill your little head with lots of big ideas, and so that you can have a big job and a big career and not be financially dependent on your husband. But does this look like oppression to you? And then there's this pretty woman who might be otherwise selling boohoo bikinis.
Blow-dried hair. They've often got very well blow-dried hair.
Blow-dried hair. And these women reckon they've got 4 to 6 kids.
Somewhere.
Where are these children?
Yeah.
They're in a gingham dress and an apron, and they are making Fruit Loops from scratch for their children, because nutrition. In a white gingham and pale pink dress with a pretty apron. And then a handsome man will come in and kiss them and go, I love you. Does this look like oppression to you? Now, they're influencing young women, because anybody who's ever looked after a child for an hour and a half will tell you cannot, even with one child, let alone
held
4,
a child for 10 minutes, you're covered in milk and snot.
You cannot make Fruit Loops from scratch. And if you do, you're going to end up covered in them. You're not going to be there in a pristine dress with your perfect makeup. You didn't have time to do that makeup. You didn't sleep well last night. Your hair is not blow dried, because a child will pull the blow dryer out if you've got 6 kids. Like, come on. So obviously their house, or they're in a television studio, or their house is made up to be like a TV studio, and someone else is minding the children. And they are showing you a life that cannot exist. And that life is looking attractive. And I saw a young influencer recently being a wannabe trad wife, and she was like, you know, when they do a dance and they point to different things.
It's a real TikTok thing, isn't it? Like,
and
no reproductive rights.
Exactly,
Delicious.
But they don't put it that way.
Drinking the Stanley Cup.
Exactly. They don't put it that way. She said, I'm preparing to be a trad wife by being in subjection to Jesus. So I'm used to being in subjection to my husband. Because if you don't know the scripture, the husband is in subjection to Jesus, and the wife is in subjection to the husband. But if you're not married, you can be directly in subjection to Jesus.
Cut out the middleman. Okay.
So she's getting ready to submit to her husband by submitting to Jesus right now. She's not getting a college degree, she points to, because she'd just be in all this college debt, and she doesn't want that. She's drinking raw milk, unpasteurized milk, for fertility, because there's a lot of the wellness.
I don't know why they've come for pasteurization, but it's a real, cannot
be good for pregnant women, but they say, it's good for fertility. I cannot believe a pregnant woman can be drinking raw unpasteurized milk, but here we are. And pointing at these things, and she's saying she wants 6 kids, and she's, again, dancing around it, looking like a sort of farm girl out of a 1950s Hollywood musical. I'm like, again, that's not what people on farms look like. You know that's not real, but a lot of people don't. And to be fair, if you are 17 and you are in a really disenfranchised area where the government has put no money into education, you're in an overcrowded classroom, there's loads of people around you on drugs, you've dropped out of school because there was no money for anything, and you don't know which direction your life's going in, and somebody goes, you can have this, it might as well be a Kardashian. If you start, hawking lipstick or something, you can have this. No, you can't. Those people are very, very wealthy Nepo babies. That's how they started. And they're very brilliant business people, clearly, but they didn't start from nothing. And the idea that you can start from nothing and this is that we are showing you this happy path, and this happy path is covenant marriages. Covenant marriages, I don't know if you know about this, in America now, there's some places you can have a covenant marriage, and that means a marriage that you deliberately enter into that is much harder to get out of. You can't divorce without...
Because the problem with marriage is it's too easy to... Okay, great.
So they say, well, you would have to demonstrate, if you want to get out of it, you have to demonstrate significant abuse, not just abuse, significant abuse. You have to go for X length of time for counselling before you can get out of it. You have to do this, you have to do that. But if you will enter into this much more binding contract than a normal marriage, the government will give you a tax break that will help you pay for the wedding. Now, we're pushing women back into financial dependence. There's a real genuine move to take the vote away from women in America. It's fringe, but it's growing, and it's got some very senior people behind it. We're taking women's reproductive rights away. And those same Christian nationalists, I don't really think they're Christian, by the way. If you're Christian, anyone listening, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a Christian faith and, a local community with whom you share that faith. This is not me coming down on Christianity. But Christian nationalism doesn't reflect any of the values that Jesus taught. It is about nationalism. It's about ethno-nationalism. And it's wrapped in this Jesus flag. But I don't believe Jesus would have anything in common with the values of...
With the trad wives, I mean.
Or just generally the Christian movement. Yeah. The trad wives are like a poster. It's like blaming the women on the L'Oreal commercials for the worst excesses of the shampoo industry and, putting shampoo into bunnies' eyes. Like, the woman on the L'Oreal poster doesn't have the power. She is literally a billboard, and that's who the trad wives are. They're being paid. I don't know how they're being paid exactly, but I have my clear suspicions of who's paying them, but I won't say so because I don't know for sure, and I don't want to spread misinformation, but it seems pretty clear how they're being grown, and I'm sure there are people copying that and then getting money from social media. But we are in a time, and this is why I've started the Road to Gilead. I
was going to say, because we had a question, John, one of our listeners, said, to what extent does Deborah think that Reform and the Tories want to follow the playbook of the Christian right? And I mean, is that is the Road to Gilead kind of unpacking that? Tell us a bit about the backstory.
Yeah. Well, the Road to Gilead is what I think we're on. I think if we go down the Reform road, we are in a situation where there was an article in the New York Times very recently by Jane Bradley and Elizabeth Dias. They're two reporters who interviewed over 40 people, including officials from Reform and the Alliance for Defending Freedom. The Alliance for Defending Freedom, or the ADF, as some of the listeners will know, are a legal organization in the United States of America who are anti-abortion and anti-queer rights, and were very instrumental in overturning Roe versus Wade. And what Elizabeth and Jane have done is find concrete ties between Reform and the ADF. Now, personally, I don't think that Nigel Farage ideologically cares really very much about abortion or gay rights. It's never really something he's campaigned on. But I think it's a price worth paying for him, because it's not really going to cost him, to say, hey, you help me get into power and become a power the way you're a power. And sure, those things really don't matter.
So the Road to Gilead is, and Gilead being the fictional nation in Handmaid's Tale. So you're doing a series of events looking at like how far we are along the Road to Gilead, or like what's the...
Looking at how we can turn it around, looking at where we're at, where America's at, and where we're at through our ties to America, and how long the Christian nationalists have been in this country, what they've managed to achieve so far. Inspiring, encouraging, engaging. How do we come together as a community? Because I believe in the United Kingdom. I mean, I want desperately to help America as well and change things in America. But this is a UK-based podcast. And also we have a big audience in Australia and New Zealand. And you can see the same things bubbling up there. I follow lots of people on social media, and you can think the same ideas bubbling up. We've got 3 years before the next election. I believe we can do it. I really, really believe. So we've got a whole program of shows in November. We've got shows on the 2nd, 4th, 10th, and 23rd, and they're all about a different angle. I'm actually working on getting a vicar on who signed this letter. There was a letter from lots of people in the church saying, we don't want the Bible and Christianity weaponized against immigrants, weaponized against women. So I'm finding people from this letter, because we've got to keep our churches away from that toxic message. So I'm interviewing different sorts of people in politics, people in reproductive rights, to go, what can we do? What can we do together? And on the 23rd of November, we have a show at the Bill Murray in North London. So it's a North London comedy club. I'm using quite small spaces because I want to have more smaller shows than rather, one big one. So we can have more guests, more nights, more neighbourhoods, more bites of the cherry. At the Bill Murray, I'm interviewing Jane Bradley, who was one of the New York Times journalists who broke the story and interviewed all those people to find out about the links between Nigel Farage and Reform and the ADF. So that's going to be a really big one. So you must come along to that if you possibly can. But they're all going to be brilliant. And all of them will have an opportunity for Q&A and community and mixing afterwards. And, I want people talking and creating their own grassroots project. And in January next year, I'm going to have a community open space where we come together, we break off into groups, we plan grassroots projects, we take them away, we do them wherever we are. And I want ideally people to be able to Zoom in or, have their own chapter in another city. And then we come in on the Zoom and say, what did you come up with? So that we can start uniting the country as well and not make it so London-based. Because with a grassroots movement, we can win this. Without it, we won't.
Thank you for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Please like, subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to hear this week's bonus episode, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/overthetop under the radar.